Alright, I've created this video today to show you the VueJS framework. It's a front-end JavaScript framework that's used for web development. It's similar to Angular and React and some other front-end frameworks. Vue has been gaining a lot of popularity. I think one of the reasons for this is it has a bit of a shorter learning curve to get into it. And one of the reasons it has a shorter learning curve is the similarities to using other sort of standard web pages, where each page has script, it has a style, and it has HTML. Some of the other frameworks use sort of more of an MVC approach, where they separate out the code into other directories, and that sort of just adds a bit of complexity when you're first learning. I wouldn't say that one is better than another. I think that React, Angular, and Vue all have their place, and they're all good for different reasons. But I quite like Vue just because it's a little bit quicker to get up and going, and I think maybe it's a better choice for smaller, simpler projects. At least that would probably be where I would place it in the ecosystem of the big three front-end JavaScript frameworks. So let's get started here. What we're going to do, there's different ways you can get started. We're going to use the Vue CLI, or the command line, to create sort of a hello world sample project, and then we'll go and customize that from there. There's a lot of other ways you can get started. One of the other ways is just to use a CDN, or basically you just include the VueJS JavaScript into a project and you can get going from there. But it's nice to use the CLI because it kind of sets up your local directory, and then it makes it easy to work offline. If you need to work somewhere where you're away from the internet, you can just run everything locally. And it has the linting enabled to show you errors and things as you type and as you go. So I think it's the best way to get started. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, so from our terminal, we're going to type Vue create a demo project. And this will just take a few minutes. It needs to download the latest versions and set up all the structure and files, so it'll take a little bit. First, we're going to select Babel and ESLint, or sort of linting utilities. And then this will take a few minutes. I'm just going to pause the video while that goes so we don't have to wait for all that. Okay, and now the Vue CLI has finished creating the project. So now, just as it says here, we're going to change directory into the demo project, and we're going to do npm run serve. So now, one thing that's good to explain now while this loads is that when we do run things with npm run serve, this is basically for development mode. So we run this just for development. When we build for production, we'll just be outputting HTML and JavaScript, and that can just be hosted on any web host and just served with Apache or Nginx or any web server that you like. So sometimes that gets a little confusing, but when the npm run for development, it uses our linting and all kinds of things like that, which help us as we go, but that's not for production. For the production, we, as it says here, now that it's finished, npm run build, and then that will just output our HTML and JavaScript that we can then host anywhere. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the directory that was created by the Vue CLI. As you can see, it created the folder called demo project, and within there's a bunch of configuration files, and here's the public. We have the HTML, we have an icon, and what we're most concerned with here is the SRC, so that's our source code. So app.vue is sort of the main page, main component that is created. So we're going to open that one up. And inside assets is just that logo again. And then components, we have our hello world component. And then we have main.js, which we probably won't use right now, but you can see that this is the main thing that loads, and then that imports Vue from Vue, import app from app, which is our main component. And then what else is here that starts the actual Vue interface, so when it mounts the app. So anyways, we're going to go back into the first file and look and see what happens here. So in app.vue, you can see we have a template, and then we have a div, and we have where it imports the hello world component, or where it displays it in the HTML. Down here in the script is where it actually imports it in line 9, and then here later on is when we tell it what components we're using. So we're declaring that we're going to use the hello world component. And then at the bottom we have some style, and this is one of the things that makes VueJS pretty simple, is that you can really see what's here and what you need without it being hidden away in some directory somewhere in a different style. So let's go back to the browser, and we'll load up our localhost port 8080. And as you can see, this is our Vue application that was created by the command line tool. So very simple at this point. Now we'll go and start to actually do something. Okay, so I'm going to start by copying the hello world component, and we're going to rename these. I'm going to call it a Vue header. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to call this one Vue footer. And then the third one I'm going to call Vue main, which will be our main, sort of where the data and all that shows up in our actual project. And now I'm going to drag these back into the component location. Another good thing to know is that in bigger projects, probably you'll create multiple directories for different parts of your project. Right now, this is obviously a small, simple project, so we'll just keep them in components. But it's pretty common to have views, which might be ones which aren't used as components, and then a components directory for ones which are used as components. And then you may also separate them out into other ones, sort of mimicking your website or application. Just basically, you can use any folder structure you'd like to organize things and as it makes sense. Okay, so we're going to go back and look at the command line, make sure we didn't cause any errors. Okay, nothing so far. Website's still loading good. Okay, I always like to check periodically, and at home I have a dual monitor set up so that I can always keep the command line tool open and the web interface open, and then with these tools running, you'll immediately see when there's an error, which saves a lot of time because you know that you type, you save, and you know exactly what you did that caused that error, rather than having to waste time and track down what might have happened 5 or 10 minutes ago. So that's a really big time saver. I always recommend keeping the command window visible so you can see what's happening when there's an error and what that error is. Okay, so next up, what we need to do within our app.vue is we need to include those files that we just created. I'm just going to copy and paste. We're going to import Vue header, import Vue main, and Vue footer. Another thing, of course, here, it doesn't actually matter the order of any of these. They can be in whatever order you like. I'm just doing it this way for simplicity's sake, but you can really put them any, it doesn't matter how you import them. So, Vue footer. Okay, so we've got those, and then down here where we declare the components that we're going to use, we're going to put Vue header, Vue main, and Vue footer. Okay. And then up here in the actual sort of HTML, we're going to tell it where to display these. And this, of course, does matter because the order in which these are placed here is how it will display in your application. So we've got Vue header, Vue main, and Vue footer. Okay, and I'm going to get rid of that message because we're not using that right now. Same thing on these other ones. We're just going to remove that. So now what we've done is okay, and we can also get rid of this hello world here because we're not using that. There's no need in importing components that we're not using. So we're importing the header, the main, and the footer, and we're declaring that we're using the header, the main, and the footer. And then up here in the HTML, we're showing it where we're actually displaying those. So let's go back to our application. And if we look carefully, we'll see that that code is being repeated 3 times because we've essentially copy and pasted that file, so we are using it 3 times. I'm just going to close that hello world.vue, and then we're going to open up, and that's actually delete hello world.vue because we're not using that. And I'm going to open up those 3 files into our IDE, and I'm going to reorder these just so they make sense. We've got header, main, and footer in the same order that we're using them. Okay. So what I'm going to go through and just delete this HTML here that we don't need. And I'm just going to write, this is the header. All right. Now let's go back and look and see if we've caused any errors. Okay, and we can see that we have caused an error. You can see it says div class equals hello, and then it says this is the header. And the error up here says that there's no matching end tag. So that's actually really helpful. So probably when I was doing this here, and yeah, as you can see, I've accidentally deleted the closing div tag. So that's a good point to mention, is that your HTML needs to be correct. If there's an error, it will immediately crash out and won't compile. So it's a good chance to be able to fix and make sure there are no errors there. And so back to the command line, we can see there's no errors, and then we can go to our application, and we can see it's working. It says this is the header. All right, so let's go back and do the same thing for main minus the mistake. We're going to delete all the HTML and say main component. And then while we're at it, let's go back and do the same thing to our footer. Okay, that one just says footer, but let's fix our indenting. Okay. So, and as you can see, that works, but it's a good chance here that we should actually put a little bit of styling here so that we know better what it is we're doing. So put style equals border 2px solid red, and on the main, let's put a style equals border 2px dotted green. All right, and on our header, class equals border 2px solid black. Okay, so now let's go back at our application. Oh, and again, I've caused an error. And so what does it say? Class border 2px solid black. Duplicate attribute class. Okay, so that makes sense. We can only have class once. If you do need to, when you're doing CSS, declare extra classes, you just put them within that same class tag like that. But what I've done is accidentally created two. So what I wanted to do is just directly put the style on there. And I should mention that putting the style directly in HTML like that is not really a good way to do things anymore. It's best to put them in an external file, because usually when you create a style, you'll be wanting to reuse that in other areas of your application or your website. So it's good to make sure that you put those in a central resource that can be maintained and managed and used again. Okay, so back to our website here. You can see this is the header, main component, and footer. So all of that is showing up correctly. Those were our three components. And the only other thing I'm going to do is also go and put a border on our main component so that we can see where that one lies. So again, we're going to go style equals border 2px solid gray. All right, so just a gray border around the outside of the app. And if you look closely, you can see that goes all the way down to the very bottom, both sides. So that is our main component. And if you're wondering why there's all this extra spacing, I believe that's just created by this styling, and mostly down by the styling at the end of the application. Some of it will be the browser default, but if I go ahead and remove that from the app, we'll probably see some of that there. As you can see, that got rid of the spacing at the top. There's still a little bit of a margin around there, which I think is the browser default, which you can also remove if you need to use the full width of the browser window and height. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that style back. Okay, so that is sort of the basics of an application where we have three components in there. Next up, what we'll want to do is do an Axios request, which is basically the browser has a feature, web browsers have a feature called Ajax, which is where they can retrieve results from remote servers other than the ones that they've retrieved the current web page from. And so they can get results from various places around the internet to support your web page or application. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, and we're going to use the console. So what you'll often want to do is, the console is a good place to see different errors as well. And also network shows the network activity. If I reload the page here, we'll see a bunch of stuff load up. There's the JS and the various images, icons, and CSS files all get loaded here. But of course, the important one is the Ajax or Axios request that we're going to do. We're going to receive a JSON file, which is a JavaScript object notation. Basically, it's a data interchange format similar to XML and other data interchange formats that you may have used. JSON is really nice, though. You can look at it and you can just really figure out what it's going to do, how it looks like, where your data is stored really quickly and easily, unlike XML, which is kind of a pain. The other thing that's really good about JSON is it works very well with object-oriented programming languages. Once we include a JSON file, we can immediately refer to those attributes right through from a variable or actually an object. So like, let's say we get a person object, and that might have a name, an age, and a birthplace. Then we can just go person.name and get their name. We can go person.birthdate and get their birth date and all that. So it's really convenient, and we're going to go ahead and do that in just a moment. So let's go and install an application called Axios that we're going to use to do our Ajax request and receive some JSON. Okay, so we're going to go npm install Axios save, and that'll just take a minute to install here. I'm just going to pause in the meantime. Axios is installed. We're going to go ahead and run our project again. npm run serve. It'll just take a moment to start up. Okay, and then it's a good chance to talk about where we're going to include this functionality. We'll probably put it in the main section, the main component. Okay, and we can put it right in the script here. All right, so we're going to start typing right here, and this is a little bit of a tricky spot to follow the brackets and commas and everything to put things just right. So you want to make sure you're typing really carefully, and you may want to look at some examples to check what you're doing before you do it. So when what we're going to use first is something called mounted, which is sort of an event that runs when Vue first loads. There's other ones like created, which you may want to use for different reasons at different times. And so basically mounted, when it's mounted or when it starts, it will run this code that's placed in here. So just to show that, I'm going to put an alert first of all. So VueJS is mounted. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our browser here, and if I need to, I'll refresh. Okay, and then as you can see, here's an alert saying VueJS is mounted. Okay, and we can probably, I'm not sure if we can do the same for created, but let's go ahead and give that a try. So yeah, that works as well. And as you can see, actually that's really interesting. So I should have changed the text here. Let me go ahead and do that. So VueJS is created. So you notice when I load this alert on created, the pop-up actually comes up before the Vue interface is loaded in the background. You see how the browser window is gray and it's still loading? That's because it has blocked and it has not loaded while this alert is up. And then once I press OK, it loads. But mounted, as we can really tell, is just a little bit different. And what happens is that the mount has already happened. Basically, VueJS has already loaded before the pop-up comes up. So there's different times you may want to do this in the application. So if you want to do things before Vue has loaded, we can do it sort of in created, and then mounted is a little bit later in the process, as we can see. So there's certain things, like if you want to edit the DOM, or you want to basically change text and things within the web page, you obviously don't want to do that until the page is actually created. So that should be done in mounted. But if you can do something earlier, like our Axios request, it's okay to do that in created, because that's when things first are created. In other words, while the Vue hasn't loaded in the window, it's okay to do things like external network requests, because we don't need the browser to be loaded for that. So, and it's actually good to perform this action as early as possible, because it will take time for the remote server to respond. So what we're going to have to do, actually the first thing I need to do is import Axios from Axios, and so it's nice and easy now that we use the npm to actually install it, and then now I'm importing it to let it know that we're using it within this component. And that's another thing to mention, is that will be scoped basically to this particular object. It won't be global at this point. We can put things globally. You can put them in main.js or other parts of your Vue project if you want them to be accessed globally, but we're just using it within this component, so I'm just importing it from within this component. Okay, so next up we're going to do Axios.get, and of course you can do other network functions other than a get. You can do a post or other RESTful protocol implementations like put and patch and so on, delete. Okay, but right now we're just going to do a simple get. Okay, and then what we're going to do next is we're going to have a response. Oh, actually what we need to do is get the formatting correct here. We do a .then, which basically then fires when the Axios receives a response. It's also a really good idea to have some error checking here in case the Axios request fails, which could happen for a lot of reasons. If the remote server's down, it's really slow to access it, or it doesn't allow you to access it, you get a permission denied. There's all kinds of errors that could happen, so we should really do error checking. But in this example, I'm just going to do a simple, then we're going to assume that all is good. So I'm going to put response. And then next up, what we're going to do is, this is in JavaScript. If you're not familiar, it's called an arrow function. And then basically that is going to run the next code, assuming that works. Okay, so then what we need to do is select a public data source that we can use. There's all kinds of ones. There's JSON placeholder. So this is a good one for just simple APIs that you can access. So this is a to-do one that you can use. So I'm just going to copy this and place that into our Axios request. So as you can see, JSON placeholder, to-dos, and then one. And then basically what that will do is that will then trigger the .then, and then response will be our response object, which will contain the data, hopefully, if all went well. And so what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to do a console.log, which is just a way to debug things. If you're familiar with JavaScript, puts them out into the web browser console. And then we're going to put response.data. All right, so now we're going to go back to our browser and see what happened. So actually it looked like it already worked, but I'm just going to refresh the browser to see. Okay, there we go. So as you can see, it retrieved an object. Completed, false, ID 1, title, something I can't read, user ID 1. So basically it retrieved our first to-do object, which is great. But what we want to do probably next is not actually console log it. We want to place this within the application itself, which requires a bit more work. So let's get started on that. So, and there's a few gotchas along the way that there's a bit of a learning curve this will hopefully be helpful to learn. So let's put to-do title equals response.data title, I think it was. Yeah, title. Okay, so in theory you think that would work, but we get an error. So we get assignment to undeclared variable to do. Okay, and so what we should really be doing is using something called TypeScript. It's kind of made for the job here, but instead I'm just going to simply declare it by saying let to do title equals nothing. But like I said, better to do this in TypeScript, but this will be a little simpler for now. And see if that gets rid of our error. Okay, and that got rid of our error. So now let's go ahead and put main component. I'm going to put a break, and then the way you show variables within the application is using those handlebar, basically curly braces, and then you put the variable name in there. To do title, and so I'm just going to put the text as well. To do title. And then also let's put span style equals, okay, color red. Okay, and that's just going to show us the variable in red so that we can see a little bit nicer that we've retrieved some data. It's kind of kind of exciting. Okay, and let's go back to the browser, and oh, we've got all kinds of errors here. Okay, so this is a really common one that even experienced developers always seem to make and forget. So property or method to-do title is not defined on the instance but referenced during render. So make sure this property is reactive either in the data option or for class-based components by initializing the property. So what we're going to have to do basically is we're going to have to initialize that variable again to let Vue know that we want to use that, and that it's basically that it's okay that it's going to be blank when it first shows, and so on. So what we're going to do is after mounted and all of that, we're going to create a new section called data. And inside there's going to be a return section. And then this is where we're going to declare that. So it's going to be to-do title, which is to-do title. And if you had more to declare, you can just do that by putting a comma and putting the next one below it. But for this simple demo, we just have the one. So let's go back and clear out our errors and see if that fixed it. I'm going to refresh the browser. Okay, so as you can see, that got rid of the error. There's no errors. It retrieved the Axios request, but there's still nothing in our application. So this is another sort of common gotcha that you need. It's sort of a JavaScript thing as much as a Vue thing. What we need to do is we need to refer to the specific instance, which is this.todo title. So now let's go back and see if that one worked. And hey, as you can see, that worked. Now we've got main component to-do title, and it's got the title. So that is really exciting. So we've now built a simple Vue application. We've retrieved a remote data using Axios and displayed that within our application. Now the next thing to do is, of course, normally when we get data, it's probably not going to be first loaded when the first application is loaded. Usually we are pushing a button or selecting something in an application, filling in a form or something along those lines. So long story short, we're going to need a function. And that, again, there's a little bit of a learning curve to doing functions in front-end frameworks and in Vue. So let's go ahead and create, after our data, we're going to create our methods. So methods. Now methods basically are going to be functions. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that and make sure there's no error. Okay, and we do, so we got to go ahead and fix that. Probably because I didn't actually have a method in there. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so what we're actually going to do is do it a little bit differently here. We're going to go, and we're not going to use mounted anymore. So this can become our methods up here. Now methods are basically functions. Okay, so, and this is going to be a function. We're going to have a get result function, just nice and simple. And then we're going to need an extra closing brace at the end here, and some proper indenting so that we can see what's going on. I'm missing a semicolon here. So basically we're declaring and a curly brace. Okay. Okay, I've just undid that code there. We're just gonna type it again because I did something wrong. Okay, so we're gonna change our mounted to be instead methods. And then we're going to declare our function, which will be, just call it get result. And then no arguments right now. Okay, and extra curly brace at the end. Okay, methods. So, and this is where we're going to put our function. The syntax here is really tricky. You have to get sort of just right, or you get an error. So we're going to have get result function, and that's where you can put arguments, which we're not going to use right now. Okay, so that worked. We've got a get result function, which doesn't do anything currently. We can indent it. Okay, and then in here is where we're going to put our Axios.get. And then we're going to use .then again. Basically, this part will be exactly the same as before. Response. And then again, we can use an arrow function to then tell it what we want to do. And this will be again just this dot to do title equals response dot data dot title. So basically that's exactly the same as before. Now we have it located within a function called get result. Okay, and I'm just going to grab that URL again here from the JSON placeholder. Okay, and save that in there. So now when we go back to the browser, of course, it's not going to run that request, because this request will now only run when we call the get result function. Okay, so now we probably don't want to do that in the mounted or loaded or anything like that. We want, or created, we want to do it maybe with a button or something like that. So let's go back up to our main component. All right, and then let's create a button which we can use to load the data, because that's a lot more like a regular application. So button, and I'm going to put a style right away, equals, so let's say background color red, color, which of course is the font color, white, and we'll make it a height of 50 px and a width of maybe 200, and let's make a big font size 2 of 20 px. Okay, so that just makes it so we can see the button a little bit easier. Okay, and then to the interesting stuff here, we're going to do v on. So v on is sort of a keyword that Vue will watch out for, and in this case we're going to look for the click, and within that click event we're going to call get result, and that's where we could put our arguments, except right now we don't have any. Basically arguments are how you can pass things to a function, of course, but we don't need those right now. We're just basically calling that function so that when we hit that button, oops, I did something with that font so that it's not very visible. Oh, I know. Actually, there is no text in here, so in our text for the button, let's put get result. Let's put get to do item, because that's actually what it is. All right, so then we can see get to do item. We have a giant red button. Let's hit that and see if it works. Okay, and that worked. As you can see, to do title, and there it is. Now we've retrieved that by pressing a button in Vue. Okay, now let's take this one step further, and quite often in applications you want to send some sort of data to get a specific result. So like, we don't always want to get the first to do item, we might want to get the second or the third or so on. We want to get the specific one that we're looking for. So let's go, and this is where we will want to so let's get rid of this button, and instead of a button, let's use a select. So basically it's just the standard select HTML component. select, except we're going to use view on change. So instead of using click, we're using change. So when you click the select, it will then fire the event. So we're going to put get result and no argument just for now. All right, and then option value equals, we'll do 1. Okay, first to do item option value equals 2. Second to do item. Okay, and then we're going to close the select. Okay, so let's go ahead and give this a try and see if that works. So as you can see, it looks like it's actually already loaded. So it probably calls the first one when the page loads. Oh, maybe not. Okay, so let's go try changing that and see what happens. Yep, so that's working. Okay, so it's calling it and loading it, but of course that's always showing the first one because we're not actually sending the value yet. So there's different ways of doing this. I'm going to do it this time with a V model, and so we'll call it to do ID, and then we're going to send our argument of to do ID, and so let's also receive that to do ID. Oops. To do ID down here. Okay, and this is a good place because where things sometimes get lost is when you're passing variables around everywhere. So let's practice doing a console log, and we'll put to do ID plus to do ID here. So basically what we're doing is we're console logging out that ID with the text so that we know that it's working properly. Okay, let's go ahead and give that a try. Okay, so actually that worked. We got to do ID 2 and to do ID 1, so it's sending the appropriate one. But of course, it's still only receiving the first one because we're not yet putting that in the Axios request in the URL. So we have that variable here. Let's get rid of that console log. And so there's lots of different ways of doing this. You can do it through concatenation, but what I'm going to do is use angled braces instead. It's just a little bit cleaner. So the angled braces allow you to basically put variables within that string. So we're going to do it using this and to do ID. And of course, actually what we want to do is get rid of that 1 there because we're going to be putting our own number in there. Okay, so let's refresh and see what happens. Okay, so now we're getting the same error again here. You might remember this from before. That's one that happens a lot. Property or method to do is not defined on the instance but referenced during render. Make sure this property is reactive, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so basically what we need to do is we need to tell VueJS that we want to use that variable. So let's go ahead and go down here. We have to do title, and let's add here to do ID, which is to do ID. All right, and then let's refresh and see if that fixed our error. Well, let's clear out the old ones, refresh, and then see if that fixed it. Okay, so now we're still getting an error about it being not defined. So we probably have to go back up to the top here and say let to do ID. There we go. Okay, and let's go clear the errors, refresh, and see, look, now all of our errors are gone. So yeah, those are the things we need to do. And again, it's really best to use TypeScript for declaring variables. That's really sort of made for the job. I just haven't set that up yet. Something to do in a future video. Okay, so first to do, there's our first to do, which we probably recognize. Now let's see if it loads the second one. Hey, that worked. That loaded the second to do. So let's, just for fun, let's show how easy it is to access different APIs. So we've got a really nice little system set up here for a simple application. Let's try a different open public API. Here's a Star Wars API we can use. So basically works the same way, except it's a different URL and different objects will be retrieved. So we're going to use this swappy.co/API/people. Okay, so instead of using to-dos, we're going to use Star Wars stuff. Okay, and so let's be proper and change our variable name. So this is going to be, let's say, person ID. I'm not sure they're all people, but close enough. Okay, so we have person ID, and then we need to person ID. Okay, and then of course, instead of being to-do title, it's going to be first name. Let's do, and I believe in the API object it's called just name, but I like to be a little bit more clear and call things first name in case we have a last name, we might have a nickname, we might have all kinds of different names. So I'm going to declare this up here, first name, and then of course we need to go down into the VueJS data section and call it first name, and then we need to go back up to the top, and instead of being to-do ID, this is going to be person ID, okay, and then instead of first to-do item, it's going to be first Star Wars person, second Wars person. Okay, and let's just take a little look over here. We've got get result person ID. We're passing it the person ID that we've selected, which we get from the option. Okay, and of course it's no longer to-do title, so it's now first name. Okay, and then this will be first name. Okay, so that seemed all good. Let's give it a try. There's errors all over the place, but hopefully those have mostly been fixed. I'm going to clear that out and refresh and see what happens. Okay, so let's try first Star Wars person. Okay, and it looks like that is not working, so let's go back to our code and see. Actually, this is a good chance to do a little bit of debugging. So nothing's showing up in the errors. Let's have a look at our network and see if we did receive an external resource. Okay, so I'm going to clear them out and try again here and see if anything came back. Okay, so as you can see, params, so let's go to headers. So we did send a response to Swappy API and response. So it's kind of giving a general response. So it's almost like we missed something when we put that in. Okay, so I seem to remember we forgot to enter something correctly in the URL. So we have swappy.co API and then person ID, but what it actually wants is the particular section. So it wants people and then one. So that was the mistake that I made here. So let's go API people and then / person ID. So let's go back and refresh and see if that fixed anything. I'm going to clear that out and let's select for Star Wars person. Okay, so now it's retrieving the object correctly. As you can see, green 200 okay in our status in our network debug of our developer tools, and it has Luke Skywalker, yada yada yada, all this, but it's not showing up in our application. So there's the Axios request is working, we're talking to the API, but something must have happened along the way. So we have results and then name. So what could have gone wrong here? So we are receiving that response, and then we're going response.data.name. So what we could do is might actually be response.results.name. Is that the problem? Let's go ahead and give that a try. Okay, so actually what it is, see the way it's retrieving a number of different objects. So what that means most likely is that our ID didn't pass through correctly because it received our request to people, but there was no ID. So the API is sort of a smarter one. It's responding saying, oh, I know you want people, but you didn't tell me which person you want. So it's just going to give probably 10 or so, let's see, yeah, 9, or I guess it is 10 starting at 0 responses. So it's giving us 10 names, but it didn't know that we were actually looking for number 1 in our request. So that must have gotten lost somewhere along the way. So let's go ahead and go back and see what happened. So we have person ID. Oh, as you can see right here, I forgot one of the declarations. So when we receive this here, we want to receive it and turn that into person ID. And then I bet you that'll do it. That was probably a mistake. And so let's clear the network data out and let's give one a try. Okay. So now that did receive just Luke Skywalker. So now that request is working totally properly, but we're still not receiving it in our console. Okay. Oh yeah, and that was because I made that other mistake. So I called it response.result. This is usually always response.data. .name. So let's go ahead and give that a try. Okay, and now that's working. So first Star Wars person, Luke Skywalker. Second Star Wars person, 3CPO. So now we did the to-do API and we did the Star Wars API, and basically other RESTful APIs are all really similar. You just need to sort of match which object it is you're talking to. And you can use them within your application. That way it's a really nice way to program and really, really powerful. So in a future course, we'll have to talk about things like props, where you send properties to the other components. So like, for example, if we did this request in the main component, maybe we also want to display that in the footer. Well, that does take a little bit of extra work. You need to send that and receive that in that component. They're not sort of natively available. Another thing you can do is the VueJS store, which can store variables, and then there's the router for routing to different pages, and a number of different features like that in VueJS. It's a really fun and interesting framework to work with, really powerful and useful. And I hope you enjoy this video, and will be more coming on VueJS. Thank you for watching.